Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to the Criminology mini class session. My name is Matt Thurgood and I'll be taking you through tackling the cybercrime universe. So we're going to be talking broadly about all things cybercrime, and we'll focus in on a few particular issues, most notably issues around scams and that type of thing, frauds, etc. Before we do get underway, a note that we are recording this session, and more importantly, in the spirit of reconciliation, ACAP acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So I am sitting on the unceded lands of the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm. So I would like to acknowledge that group in particular. And yeah, if you know the lands of the First Nations peoples on which you are currently, feel free to pop that in the chat as an acknowledgement if you'd like to. All right. So what we're going to be doing in this session is running kind of a short class. So it's going to be a bit of a mix of things. So I'll be asking you some questions and we'll have a bit of a chat around a few things, but I'll also give you some information. So it's a bit of a mini lecture, kind of interactive lecture around the issue of cybercrime. A number of you have warmed up to the chat, so feel free to keep popping in comments or any questions you have about the content in the chat. And I'm also happy to take any questions you have about the content or about ACAP, what we teach at ACAP in our criminology courses, etc. At the end. So yeah, hopefully learn a little bit, hopefully have a little bit of fun along the way. So a bit about, maybe I'll start with ACAP and then I'll come to me. So ACAP, you've probably jumped on our website and had a read of it. We've been around for quite some time, as you can see there, since 1983, and we deliver courses in a number of different areas. So as I mentioned, unofficial chat, criminology, it's an obvious one. That's why we're here, but coaching, counselling, psychology, social work, and also more recently, law and management. So criminology, we've been around since the late 1990s. I've been part of the team teaching criminology since the early 2000s. Actually, it's been a while. And yeah, very much teaching focused in my role. So I am the course leader for criminology and justice. Simply means I look after the courses that we teach. Do a bit of teaching myself. I'm still a student. I'm still in the middle kind of a PhD. So I know what it's like trying to balance work and study and life and all the rest of it. And when I get a chance, I do like to watch some sport. Being in Melbourne, AFL is my go, and cricket when it's summer. And also, horror movies, etc. So if you do end up becoming an ACAP student at any point, I'm more than happy to chat about all of those things. All right, so let's jump in. Our topic is cybercrime. So we're going to start with some broad parameters around what cybercrime actually is. And then, we'll narrow it down to a few more specific issues. So I'll be citing a bit from some authors by the names of Yar and Steinmetz. Just so you know, some of this content is actually, I've taken it from a cybercrime unit that we teach here at ACAP. So Yar and Steinmetz have written a textbook called Cybercrime and Society. So if you see that, see those authors, that's the textbook I'm referring to, maybe along with a couple of other references too, but just, letting you know. So as Yar and Steinmetz state, cybercrime is any criminal activity that takes place within or by utilizing networks of electronic communication, such as the internet. So it's a pretty, I think, clear, straightforward, expected definition of this offending area. I think the key thing to point out is we often associate cybercrime with computers. You know, that's part of it. Really, these days we have to consider really internet-based, networked-based technology. So really, it's more about the internet than it is about devices or computers. It's whatever is connected to the internet that's, you know, kind of a tool, but it's the internet, as we'll talk about, that provides the opportunity. So it's all about, you know, focusing on offences or activities that rely wholly on technology. All right. So there is a bit of fun to be had thinking about cybercrime differently from sort of traditional offline crimes, if we can call them those, because there are behaviours that are similar across, but the technology component nearly always throws up an extra complication, we can say. So, and I'll get to those briefly towards the end. A couple of little bits around it, or the ways to think about how technology facilitates cybercrime, is that it's just there sort of as an add-on. Okay, so we can think about crimes like fraud, for example. Okay, scams. Frauds and scams have existed for centuries, to be honest. Okay, there's always been people trying to rip other people off by lying to them, right? Fleece money out of them. So the internet comes along and just provides another way that people can do that same thing. Okay, and that's what I mean by technology is simply an aid, right? It helps people commit a crime they otherwise would be committing. There are other offences where it couldn't happen without the technology, okay? And hacking is a great example of that. It's the global internet, the World Wide Web, if you like. It's the global internet that allows somebody to be sitting, say, in your capital city, and then hack into a system that's on the other side of the world, right? Totally reliant on the technology. And then we're at the stage now, and I won't talk about AI, artificial intelligence or anything, because that takes things an extra step. But in sort of treading that area, there is the idea that you can now have technology that is basically committing the offence itself. So it's programmed to do something by a human. So the technology, I've framed it as the offender there. If you think about malware, malicious software, viruses, trojans, worms, all those sorts of things. Excuse me for a second while I cough. Excuse me. Yeah, you have somebody who creates a program. They put that program out into the world, and it does its own thing. I'm just going to pause the recording for a second. Excuse. Okay, so yeah, the idea of, you know, technology as the offender, it still involves humans at this stage. Humans creating programs that then do harm, but you know, you have things like so-called spam bots. So a program that once installed will just send out spam emails constantly, that type of thing. So yeah, that's kind of the leaping pad then to artificial intelligence and all the things that it's capable of. But as I say, we'll leave that alone for tonight. So there are a number of cybercrimes. There are probably the common ones that we think of. I imagine things like cyber frauds and cyber scams are top of the list, things like cyberbullying. So Wall, David Wall is someone who's been writing about cybercrime, computer crimes, technology and crime for decades. You can see there a reference to a text that he wrote way back in 2001, where he provides these essentially 4 key categories of cyber offences. So I won't go into a huge amount of depth around these. Some of them are more self-explanatory than others, but just to give you a sense of the wide array of behaviours that people are able to perpetrate online. So firstly, there's what Wall calls cyber trespass. So crossing boundaries into other people's property, potentially causing damage. So hacking, right, is essentially a form of cyber trespass. It's people accessing a network or a system or even a device that they technically don't have permission, okay, to do so. So, you know, a classic example is maybe a group, you might have heard of a group like Anonymous, been around for a while, that hack into government sites and servers, or hack into private companies as a way to show that governments and companies aren't doing enough to safeguard people's data, that type of thing. There's also the idea of things like defacement, which is where, and it's still got hacking as a basis. So somebody gets access to, say, a government website, say a public facing government website, let's say the Australian government, and they decide to deface the picture of the Prime Minister, right? Draw, I don't know, devil horns on him or something because they're trying to make a political point, this type of thing. Cyber deceptions and thefts. So that's basically stealing, people using the internet as a way to steal, whether that's through frauds, so they create a scam, or something even like digital piracy, which still apparently costs the film industry and the music industries billions of dollars per year, if you believe them. So yeah, for mine, it's an interesting one, having been a teenager in the 90s and early noughties and downloading stuff, and even through the Game of Thrones kind of era, getting around paywalls and whatnot. But even something like digital piracy we can consider as a form of cyber theft. Cyber pornography. So broadly, the posting of illicit materials online, that covers a broad array, probably a broader array of behaviors than we might consider. It's largely considered sexual exploitation material, whether that involves children or adults. There's also things like what's called image-based sexual abuse, commonly called revenge porn, but academic scholars don't like that term because it's fairly narrowing, and tends to focus on the sort of the sex element without looking at it as an abusive or exploitative behavior. So cyber pornography again can cover quite a few different areas. Cyber violence, causing psychological harm or inciting physical harm. So cyberbullying, stalking, people posting hateful or discriminatory messages, all of that sort of thing as well. So to be honest, before I looked into this area, I'd never considered online violence as a as a sort of legitimate category, but we know that even if we consider cyberbullying, let's say, the harms that it presents to people are huge. It tends to be more insidious than physical bullying because of the relentless nature of it. It's very difficult to escape cyberbullying given we live our lives online. So framing it as cyber violence, I think, is useful because it helps us kind of show the scope, demonstrate the scope, the damage, the harms that it can create, given we know that, a victim of cyberbullying, there's self-harm, there's potential, suicide, etc. It can be really, really horrible, the outcomes of it. So again, using Wall's classifications, I think, are useful for that. And there's also some broader stuff that Wall doesn't quite touch on, but cyber trespass and potentially cyber violence also relate to some other areas. So things like cyber terrorism, which of all of these things I can tell you don't need to worry about so much, but also things like, say, espionage, which is more about governments doing things to other governments, or even leaks. So where you have somebody who works within government releasing information. Julian Assange is a famous example of that. There was recently in the United States the case of a 24-year-old guy, I can't remember his name, who released documents from the Pentagon So you hear about those sorts of things. So is there a particular cyber offence, whether one that I've just mentioned or another one, that you are most concerned about? Is there one you feel we need to be doing more about now? So yeah, Jackie Edward Snowden, that's another good example of the issue of a leak, perhaps. It certainly fits into that. So Helen, thanks. You've suggested fraud. Any particular reason why you've chosen fraud? Helen has gone with cyber violence. Yeah, what's the point of interest there? Others, any thoughts? What are you most concerned about? Yeah, so Maya, I haven't mentioned the dark web, have I? So the dark web we can talk about as really it's more there to facilitate illicit trade. Yeah, and maybe you have organized crime groups or terrorist groups even using it to communicate, but honestly, they don't need to. There are easy enough ways to hide in plain sight on the surface web, as it's referred to. But yeah, it is its own kind of issue, the dark web. So Jackie's got another bit in cyber violence. Helen, yeah, so working in financial services, I imagine you'd see all sorts of things. And yeah, okay, sorry to hear you've been a victim. Liv, cyber violence, because it can escalate. Indeed. Yeah, so you're right. It can escalate to other offences and it can escalate to real world harm or offline harm. Yeah, however we want to encapsulate that. Yeah, I think that's a chalk 76. I'll go with that. Anything involving children, I know, yeah, will always draw concern. You're right. So I think, yeah, the issues with online bullying, it does tend to still be something that impacts teenagers. The research that I've read most recently still, yeah, has a focus on teenagers as being the most exposed to it, the most vulnerable to it. I mean, it does impact basically all age groups from primary school aged up to, various adult age groups. But yeah, certainly impacts younger people far more. TS, identity theft. Yeah, so as linking that to frauds and scams, identity theft is a key kind of motivation for cyber offenders. Yes, there's a few of you with cyber violence and in particular cyberbullying. Yeah, certainly can understand that. Kelly, a vote for digital piracy. Not many people say they're worried about that one. Curious as to why I've mentioned that one.
You there, Matt?
Yes, we can hear you, Kelly. So just reminder that we are recording, so your voice will be heard.
I do apologise. I just the reason I ask about the digital privacy is more so like with the incident that happened with Optus about people getting access to your documents and things like that. So that way, if we actually understand and we can protect ourselves better, at least this way, we can't get digital piracy happening.
Yeah, so I just need to clarify. So digital piracy refers to something slightly different. Digital piracy is generally used to describe people infringing copyright, if anything, intellectual property theft. So, people downloading movies or TV shows or music and that sort of thing. What you're referring to sounds more like a data breach. So the issue of as you mentioned, so it was Medibank, there was Optus, there was a few different fairly large companies over the last 12 months that have had issues with, large amounts of consumer data being released. So I will come back to some of the challenges around all of that, but it's to some extent it's difficult for us to do much as individuals. We are basically always putting stuff online, right? To be online, you kind of have to put yourself online in some sense to utilize apps on your phone even, right? You're giving away some of your privacy. So it is a really difficult line, but unfortunately, yeah, that gives way to vulnerabilities. So I'll use that actually as a segue into the next big citizen. I can see your question. If you can hold that one off until the end. So when I open it up for Q&A, please repost that and I'll answer it at the end. So the internet, I think it's important to consider just the impacts that it does have. So we all use it, right? We're all using it right now. We're in a Zoom, we're online, we're coming in from all parts of Australia, and some of us are elsewhere, in fact, in the world. Right, so the internet's brilliant. It provides us with so many opportunities to communicate, to entertain ourselves, to shop, to do all manner of things. From a crime point of view, though, and sorry, I know there's a lot of words on the slide there, but there's basically 3 key points that I want to make around just the significance of the internet technology to crime. And this speaks to some of the challenges as well around, or rather what authorities face in trying to address cybercrime. So the idea of a virtual world going online means that we don't have barriers, right? We're less protected from crime when we're online, okay? Because as potential victims, let's say, we are susceptible to offenders from anywhere else in the world, because basically once you're online with the rest of the online world, which I think last count is slightly below 5 billion people, right? So 5 billion of the world's 7.5 billion people or thereabouts is online. So that idea of removing physical barriers, right, means there's more possibility, okay, for people to be victimized. That then feeds into what is described as a force multiplier. So Jahr, the author Jahr, who I mentioned earlier, Jahr and Steinmetz, Jahr came up with this idea about 15 years ago. This idea that just the nature of the internet technologies, the fact that they're relatively easy to use, cheap, if not free, and the fact, again, that you've got all of these people online creates this force multiplier, what Jahr calls a force multiplier effect, where basically, as per my example right there, you can have one email, a scam email, let's say, that gets sent out to hundreds of thousands of accounts, right? So the person sets up a program, basically a bot, or what's called a bot, and gets that to send out this email to tens of thousands of people. Versus back in the day, for those more in my age group, you may recall writing letters, posting letters. If you wanted to, send out a mass scam letter, that would have taken quite a lot of time. Say even with a typewriter or a photocopier, etc., there was still the effort of putting it in an envelope and sending it or posting it via snail mail. Clearly, email does away with all of that, right? So hence the force multiplier effect. Your program, some malware, it sends out all of these emails and you've got 100,000 people potentially on the hook, right? And there's that idea that you only need 1% of the recipients to respond, and an offender is still able to make a decent amount of money from that scam. Yeah. And the last bit, the bit that makes it particularly difficult for authorities, is the fact that being in cyberspace, people are easily able to hide their identity. Okay, so there's that anonymity. You can be anonymous online. Okay, and for example, there are people in the Zoom room who are attending right now who are using aliases and therefore remain anonymous. If somebody wants to engage in a cyber offense, then not always, but some of them are pretty clever. They will hide their tracks. They'll use things like virtual private networks. They will use encrypted browsers. They will have a level of cyber knowledge that allows them to remain hidden. So that makes things difficult, certainly from an authority point of view, trying to locate offenders and all the rest of it. But even at the most superficial level, how do you know who you are maybe emailing or communicating with online is who they say they are, right? So there's that basic idea that people can manipulate their own identity and thereby manipulate others, reinvent their identity. So I think it was Jane mentioned she'd received an email. It was basically a romance scam. They're the classic example, right? You've probably heard of the idea of catfishing. People create fake identities in order to lure people in. Yeah, and then the thing with the romance scam is they'll find a way to fleece the victim of money and potentially tens of thousands of dollars, right? If not more. So again, on the one hand, the internet is great for a whole number of reasons, but it does provide these opportunities for criminal behavior, and in some cases makes it easier to perpetrate crimes and can even make it worse. To be clear though, I'm not blaming the internet. All right, so is the internet the problem? No. The internet is a tool, right? It's a tool that we as human beings use. As I mentioned, we use it to communicate, we use it to learn, like we're, I don't know, maybe hopefully doing right now. Use it for commerce, so banking, you know, investment, whatever, entertainment, think of all your streaming services, all of these sorts of things. All right. So Yaron Steinmetz describe it as a blank slate, right? The internet is there and people use it for all of these sorts of things. It's how we use it that provides the opportunities for cybercrime, right? So all of the shopping that we do online means there are opportunities for people to engage in credit card fraud. So whether that's ripping somebody off, ripping off their credit card details, so form of identity theft, whether it's somebody using a fake credit card to purchase and ripping off the seller, that sort of thing, selling fake goods, you know, there's any number of different criminal activities that occur just in the consumer space, right? And again, I'll come to some of that in a moment, some specific examples. Think about social media. Right. On the one hand, social media is fantastic. Allows you to connect with people globally, stay in touch with friends, family, etc., regardless of where you are in the world. And yet, that real negative side to social media, the cyberbullying, okay, that a number of you have earmarked as the, if not one of the major issues online. Issues with stalking. So again, in teaching the cybercrime unit, I learned, and I was very surprised to read that when it comes to cyber stalking, something like 70% of it involves strangers, right? So in my head, given what we know about stalking in the offline world, tends to happen between ex-partners, former partners, so a relationship breaks down, one can't let go, and usually it's the male, you know, assuming a heterosexual relationship, and the male stalks the female. Right? That's the usual go in the offline world. Online, as I say, it's strangers. So it's somebody seeing somebody's profile, say on Facebook, and assuming that they have something that, I don't know, something desirable about them, and then they stalk that person, never having met them in the real world. So I suppose as an old person, that has, I don't know, it just surprises me that that's how things operate, right? But such is the way. And things like hate speech, right, online. And social media, again, provides these great opportunities for communication, but comes with a whole lot of negative stuff. I find it difficult to separate. And then there's also, sorry, I've used an acronym there, IoT stands for the Internet of Things. Okay, Has anybody heard that term before? The Internet of Things? I can only see Sharon. She's shaking her head. That's okay. Lawrence has. Anyone got an example of what we mean by an IoT device? You might be using one. You might be wearing one right now. Thanks, Lauren. Yes, Lawrence, smart fridges. That's actually an example I kept going back to because I find that concept hilarious. And for those who haven't heard of, or not sure of what a smart fridge is, it's one that you can control via your, say, an app on your phone. So you can, change the temperature and do these sorts of things. Excuse me. So things like smart TVs, or some of you have far more technical terms for this stuff. Near field connection, thanks Yi, which generally works with our mobile phones. Thanks Jackie. Non-interactive devices such as temperature sensors. Yeah, anything. That's it. So anything that connects to a network. So any device that connects to your internet, say your Wi-Fi in your house. So indeed, thanks for the examples, folks. So things like, robot vacuums, potentially laptop cameras. That was an issue some time ago. Things like Google Nest or Alexa, all these sorts of things. Smart watches. That was what I meant by you might be wearing one. So things like smart watches. There's basically, smart cars. Wait till those come along in a major way. I wasn't aware of air purifiers, Maya. But thanks for that one too. Yeah, there's any number. So the Internet of Things is basically all the stuff that we connect to. So think about light bulbs, heating systems, air conditioning, all of that sort of stuff. All of that stuff is vulnerable to hacking and malware. And arguably, IoT devices are more vulnerable to these things because they have less security precautions around them. There is the question of why would somebody want to hack a fridge or a smartwatch or something like that? Generally, the research suggests it's around ransomware. So that idea, you lock somebody out of their devices, or use something like, say, a smartwatch, which doesn't have as much security around it compared to, say, a phone or a laptop, use that to access somebody's network and then shut them out of their own network and say, if you don't pay me $1,000, I'll shut it down, right? Or never give you access, that type of thing. That's what, ransomware generally refers to. So, it's one to think about if you are a user of those things. So Marcel, good question. How safe is public Wi-Fi? Generally not that safe. Cybersecurity experts generally recommend that we don't use public Wi-Fi, particularly in places like McDonald's or Bunnings or those sorts of corporate ones. I don't even know if, in Victoria or in Melbourne, the Victorian government provides Wi-Fi in the CBD. I'm sure most state governments do that around the place, but even still, I'm paranoid about it, but I don't know how even safe that stuff is. That's the thing, Maya. And sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So it's the way we use the internet is the point. All of these devices that we use that give us convenience, right? We love it because it makes life easier, makes life better. I don't know, but makes life easier. So that convenience issue, that makes us vulnerable. Right? Think about how many different passwords we use, all of that sort of stuff. If you're like me, you've probably got I've got maybe 5 or 6 basic ones, and then I use variations of those. Is that enough? Not according to cybersecurity experts, right? Are they complex enough? Probably not. So there's all of that fun. So just thinking about frauds and scams specifically, just because it's tends to be one of the key concerns people have. Maybe next time we'll focus in on cyberbullying, given legitimate concerns around that one. there are a whole bunch of different types of frauds or scams. So I know romance scams came up, and again, I was surprised to learn that as much as we hear about romance scams, they're nowhere near as significant in terms of the losses people experience compared to investment frauds. So the data or the numbers you can see there have come from the oh no, I can't remember where I've pulled it from. The Australian government cybersecurity agency. That's not the actual name of it because the name of it escapes me at this point. But you can find that data via the Australian government. So yeah, you can see investment frauds cost victims $1.5 billion in 2022. So investment frauds are obviously a key way that scammers are fleecing people out of money, getting them to invest in, say, fake companies, maybe investing some of their money and taking the rest. Or you might have heard of things like Ponzi schemes where people just keep taking money, pay some back from the other people they're getting money from, and then eventually just run away with a bunch of money if they don't get too greedy. So investment frauds are very, very significant, and all of these increase year on year in terms of how much people lose, but investment frauds have jumped something like 40% compared to 2021, and it was another, say, 20 or 30% compared to 2020. So it's one of those things that's just kept increasing significantly. Romance scams, 210 million. I suppose the thing to point out there, so I mean, it's still it's a lot of money, right? But I suppose in my brain, the way I was thinking, we keep hearing about romance scams. You hear about those extreme cases where somebody loses, $400,000, $200,000, where they've just kept sending money to somebody who's kept them kind of on a rope, and just kept lying to them about my ill child, or I lost the job, or I'm just struggling, and people just kept sending money. I think the average, off the top of my head, the average loss is around $1,500, 1,500 Australian dollars. So the people who are losing big are losing massively. Lisa, and that's a great point. Thanks. There is that additional issue. And I think this is possibly why romance scams get a bit more attention than things like investment fraud. So yeah, people are losing money in all of these, but there is that additional emotional, psychological component to romance scams where somebody's feeling, well, they're investing in another person, right? They're investing in a relationship that they believe is legitimate, only to find out that it's not. So yeah, you're right. There is a much more significant level of victimization, we can say, to romance scams. Some of the other ones, so phishing and spoofing, you might have heard of those terms before. Phishing can be purely financial. It is also the main way that identity theft occurs. So that's where you get that email, right, pretending to be from your bank that says, we need you to please just confirm your details, reply to this email with your key details, your name, your date of birth, and your address, right? Really cheeky ones might ask for your account numbers, but technically those three pieces of information, maybe your phone number, but your name, your full name, your address, your date of birth is generally enough to clear most security, right? If you think about the questions that you're asked, the generic questions you're asked by most companies over the phone. So, that's your basic sort of phishing. Spoofing refers to those emails in general that you get, or a link to something, maybe via social media even, that takes you to a fake site. So it looks legitimate. So it might be that email that says, I'll just use the bank as an example again, but it comes from what you think is your bank that says, we need you to check something, or here's the link to your latest statement, click on this link, and that link takes you to a fake site that happens to look identical to the actual site. You enter in your details thinking it's all fine, and then they've got you. right? So that's why organizations like banks will tell you to never click on links. They never send links in their emails. They will never ask for your personal details via email or even over the phone necessarily. It's always via their online banking system. You need to use the app, right, or the direct site. So yeah, things like phishing and spoofing impact basically, spoofing impacts basically every company in one way or another. So there's scams. You might have seen ones in recent times around Netflix. So we just need you to confirm your details, or it's a fake email that says we've shut down your account. Click on this link in order to get it going again, right? And again, looks legitimate. People enter in their basic details, and even if it's just their username and password, that's enough for a scammer to then access their legitimate account and pull their details from, whatever Netflix has, which might involve credit card, that sort of stuff. Advanced fee frauds, these are where, again, usually email-based, they will try and get the victim to send money in the hope of receiving more money in return. So the classic example of this, if you've heard of the Nigerian prince scam of some years ago, that was kind of the first one that went global, and yeah, is basically seen as the model on which advanced fee frauds are based. But basically, where it was someone claiming to be a prince from Nigeria, saying, the country's going to pot. I need to offload the tens of millions of dollars, or whatever it was, in the financial system. If you send me $100 or $1,000, whatever it was, I will, return that money and $10,000, and at the end I'll leave in an extra however much, right? And anyway, it was enough to get lots of people. Actually, that one worked quite well, arguably because it was the first one of those that we'd seen in a major way. But yeah. Well, no, apparently it did. It did work well, Maya. That's why we keep talking about it. That's the thing. We look at them now and go, why? So this is that question, right? So Chalk 76, yeah. Why do you think? I'll throw it open. Why do you think people fall for scams? We know to look for them. We know the warning signs. People still fall for them, right? People still click on links. People still put their details into sites that look dodgy. People send money. People provide account details. Why do you think people do this sort of stuff? Why do scams work? Perhaps that's the other way to think about it. Not necessarily why do people fall for them. Why do scams work? Any ideas? I do have an answer to this question, by the way, just in case you're curious. Yeah, we've got a couple of, more than a couple. All right. So yeah, you're hitting it on the head, folks. Good job. So yeah, it's simply that people simply as complicated as people being vulnerable. There's certainly that issue of emotional or financial investment and gain. So there's a greed element, we could argue. Jackie, I'll come back to your comment about social engineering because that's the key concept that I'll speak to in a moment. Yeah, that sense of urgency. So Jackie and Maya are onto that idea around if you don't click now, if you don't act now, something's going to happen. Either you can't access the jackpot or we're going to shut down your account or those sorts of things, right? So they're manipulative in that sense. Yeah, that idea, they catch us at the wrong time. I think that's, let me reveal something. I got caught in a test phishing attempt. So ACAP, or our Navitas, who kind of sits above ACAP, their IT department sent out a fake phishing fraud, which came late on a Monday afternoon, I think, and I clicked the link, and yeah. So it's just one of those things where wasn't thinking, should have known better, but clicked it. Yeah, particularly embarrassing given I was teaching the cybercrime unit at the time. Excuse me. So indeed, that idea that it just catches people at the wrong time is key. All right, so yeah, and then a few other bits. Chalk again, yeah, those that pull at the heartstrings, so that manipulative element, and Liv, what you're talking about too, is a key part of it. So I'll come back to that. There is a growing sophistication to a lot of scams as well. They're believable, right? And I think that's particularly around, I keep talking about the spoofing sites, these fake sites that look legitimate, or the emails that look legitimate, right? And they're not. And there's also that issue of people being very convincing, Kelly, for sure. And that comes down to the concept Jackie mentioned around social engineering. This is at the heart, okay, of scams and frauds, both online and offline, but we particularly see it these days in the form of online frauds. So Boulay and Junger define social engineering as being conceived as a non-technical type of attack based on human interaction complementing technical attacks. So basically, it's the social or the human element to an online scam. All right, it's that idea that if it just said, if you got an email that said, click this link, right? Or I don't know, my Gmail for whatever reason gets really dodgy ones around the Russian bride stuff, the pharmaceutical pills, the just ones that are clearly they go straight to spam, and it's obvious why they go straight to spam, right? No real social engineering around it. But the stuff that you're all talking about, there's a sense of urgency or there's an emotional element to it. There's a get rich element to it. That's what provides the pull, right? So that personal or human element. And yeah, obviously the attack itself, the scam, the fraud is designed to appear harmless and legitimate. So it's that the best scams are the ones where people don't know they're a victim, right? Or it might take them a while, months potentially, right, before they know they're a victim, and by that time they've lost a lot. A lot of money, potentially reputation, and certainly there's those psychological component impacts or harms as well that come with it, even if it's not a romance scam. So social engineering is all about that deception, the manipulation, okay, that's central to scams and frauds. We do see it in other types of cybercrime too, around hacks and malware, but yeah, social engineering really is the key bit to why scams succeed. Okay, it could even be things like it might have an appeal to authority in a sense. It looks like it's coming from a legitimate source. Maybe it's ripped off a celebrity in some way and put a celebrity's name in it. There have certainly been scams in the past that have done that really well. So yeah, any number of ways that social engineering can be applied. And what it really emphasizes or allows us to understand is the fact that cybercrimes, and particularly things like scams and frauds, are able to occur because we as humans are vulnerable, right? We are able to be duped or convinced by things without necessarily thinking through, right? And that's the thing. So again, that sense of urgency, the lack of caution, you quickly click on a link or open an attachment without thinking, right? And then potentially a system is compromised, right? Because an attachment that got opened contained a worm, and that's now fed through not just your laptop, let's say, but your home Wi-Fi network, or if it's at work, the work network, the work system, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, and those ones around even susceptibility. So it's hard to, to blame victims, but I mean, they often do get blamed, unfortunately, in this area. Like, why didn't you know better, or why weren't you more careful? That sort of thing. But things like people think they're doing the right thing. So occasionally there are those pop-ups or ad banners on certain sites that say, your computer is unprotected, enhance your security, or they can even pop up. I've seen them on my phone at times. And people go, oh, I need to do something, right? I'm not safe. I need to protect my phone from viruses and all the rest of it. So they think they're doing the right thing. And it's just a way for, someone to, I don't know, hack their system or upload some malware or whatever it might be. So yeah, social engineering is a key part of it. All right. So I know we're 5 minutes technically towards the end. So I'll just race through a few bits and then, throw it open for some questions. So I've already highlighted that there's any number of different challenges that confront authorities when they're trying to respond to scams. So that issue that offenders can remain anonymous, basically if they're just clever enough to hide their tracks, and the fact that it's a global web, right? So the internet means a person can be anywhere in the world, sending an email or running a scam or, excuse me, even cyber stalking or something like that, right? So there's the problem of jurisdiction. Can, Australian authorities firstly identify this person? If they can they get to them? So is there an agreement, say, between the Australian government and the government of the country where this offender is, so that they can actually investigate properly, apprehend them, all of that, right? So off the bat, there's huge barriers to responding. Excuse me, I'm very sorry. So a lot of it comes back to prevention. What do we do as individual users, so-called end users, to protect ourselves? So I popped the question there around, what do you do to stay safe online? Does anyone have any particular strategies they use to stay safe online? And I'm also thinking, because, you might have seen or might have received SMS or social media messages that are scams. What do you do to avoid being victimized in this space? All right, thanks. So, taking some time, so not clicking on something immediately, is a key bit. Marcel, that's an extra step. So contacting the provider to confirm legitimacy. That's quite a useful one. And Jackie, that's the general advice, right? Is to not put everything online. So restricting how much you post on social media, what information you post on there, that sort of thing. I get that's difficult. And I say that, as an old person who isn't really on social media that much, I don't think, I fully understand what it's like to live on Facebook, let's say, or TikTok or any of those sorts of things. But just being aware enough that you don't put everything out there, perhaps, or that everything potentially can be used as a way to exploit you. I don't know, maybe it's my paranoia that comes from looking into this stuff, but there's some basic stuff that we can do. And I admire, I like that. If it's too good to be true, then it's probably not, which is a bit of an age-old statement, right, around most scams and things like that. And thanks, Jane, for relaying that. Thanks, Sharon. Confront. I don't know if that always is wise, but certainly blocking dodgy email addresses. I know most of our phones now have spam identifiers and blockers and things like that. So the technology does work for us, but it's the social engineering side, right? That beats the technology, right? That's looking to, get to the person behind the technology. All right. So, sorry, given the time, and obviously my voice isn't enjoying tonight, so I'm sorry if it sounds a bit weird. But yes, we better put an end to that conversation there. So thanks, Saul, for your input and contributions. If you have any general questions about cybercrime stuff or anything we've talked about, please do pop it in the chat and I will answer it. But just on the, excuse me, on the ACAP side of things, so we do currently have 3 courses in criminology that we teach. There's an associate degree of criminal justice, a Bachelor of Criminology and Justice, which is our main criminology course. That's 24 units of all crim. And we also have, so for those of you who are interested in sort of the forensic psychology space or the criminal psychology space, what we call a double major, the Bachelor of Psychological Science and Criminology. So where you do half psych units and half crim. So if you are interested in any of those, again, pop any questions in the chat. Jane's popped the email address there as well, so you can ask questions there. So Maya, depending on the course, yes, I'll go with the yes. So in the Bachelor of Criminology and Justice, there's 24 units total, so like any bachelor. 20 of them are core or compulsory, and then you've got 4 electives to choose. The other 2 courses there are, you have no choice, I'm afraid.